Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you with us. 8th day of April. Got a huge week in sports. Big week in baseball. Great to have you. Joy's in today. Chris Benetti, of course, too. A lot of momentarily, you and me now, as we get it going here on this third week of the season, theoretically. And lots happening. Famous day in this history of the game. Home run number 715 for Hammerin' Hank. That, of course, at Fulton County against Al Downing and the Dodgers. We'll get to that in a little bit. I remember that I was 14 years of age, totally loving baseball. I remember the year before in September, I would take my Long Island Press and go into my little treehouse in 197 Split Rock in Syosset to see what Aaron was up to, because I knew he had a chance to break the record the previous year in the last week of the season. We'll get to all that in a little bit. Henry, of course, off Downing, the lefty. We've talked to Al, of course, many a time. Costas knows all about it. Alana's thoughts, too. That will be in a little bit, so stick with us there. We got a lot going on with a little potpourri, so let's get it started. First off, major pitching injuries, obviously, with Bieber now. Strider's going to be gone, most likely. You know, with all the Lysiga of the Yankees, the reliever, he's out. We know about Cole. We know about Perez there down in Miami. It's been a brutal run. Verlander hasn't pitched. A brutal run with these pitchers. An absolutely absurd press statement from the Players Association and Tony Clark attributing in this to pitch clock scenarios. Really, Tony? You don't think it's got a little something to do with 15-year-olds throwing 100 miles an hour and spin rates and John Hopkins surveys saying that pitch clock's got nothing to do with this? And in fact, minor leaguers in 2022 with the pitch clock reported less Tommy Johns than there are now. I mean, really? I mean, I know you hate the rules, but come on. I mean, if you're going to put a statement out, get it right. It's got nothing to do with the pitch clock. It's got to do with youth baseball, fifth graders, little league, throwing the ball as hard as they can for as long as they can at 100 miles an hour. And that's what this is about, and that's why you got all these injuries with the starters. I mean, gee whiz, baseball's got to react to that with their own statement. That was a mess all weekend. And obviously, nobody wants to see the pitchers hurt. God, I mean, the Braves got banged around with Strider. We want to see Garrett Cole pitch. We, terrible with the Marlins. We understand all this, but I mean, it's the nature of the position and throwing the ball at a high rate forever with velocity and trying to get the spins organized. That's number one. Number two is, of course, what happened as far as the weekend is concerned. Let's do three things here right out of the gate. Yankees offense is good. Stanton obviously woke up the last 2 days. He had a grand slam yesterday against Toronto. The Blue Jays had a brutal start to their season. To play in Tampa, in Houston, and at Yankee Stadium before you get a home game. I know a lot of this is the Toronto refurbishing the ballpark, but boy, that's tough. And Stanton looked good. The Yankees had the one bad game on opening day. They bounced back to win the next two, scored lots of runs in doing so. Yankees have won 8 of their first 10. They get the Marlins this week. They're going to have a good start there. Yankees might start the year 11 out of 13 to start the year. So that is number one. Give the Red Sox credit, too. They had a very good West Coast road trip. I saw a lot of them yesterday. They look better. Defense is a little better. Their starting pitching is very, very good. But let's put a little asterisk next to the Red Sox. They beat Oakland, who stinks. They split a series, of course, in Seattle, 4 games. All right, Seattle's a decent team, but let's not go crazy there. And the Angels can't pitch. So they won 7 of 10 road trip. Give them credit. But, that did include the A's, who can't beat anybody except Detroit. So let's put a little asterisk next to Boston, but they do seem like they're pitching better in 2024. So the American League East, Blue Jays road trip, Yankees 8 of their first 10, and the Red Sox, off to a decent start. Give the Pirates credit. They've done a nice job. They've won 8 of their first 10. I know their first 2 series were easy, but they bounced back after losing opening day to the Orioles. They came back the last 2 days to win against Baltimore. A good team. Henderson made the throwing error yesterday after he made a nice play up the middle. They could have won Baltimore 2 out of 3. Would have been out at first base, too. And Henderson just happened to throw the ball away. Here's the play right there. I mean, it's going to be an out. Game's going to be over. Gets it by the first baseman, and Pittsburgh wins the game. But the Pirates, listen, 8 of their first 10 in a very winnable division because there's no great teams there. That's an excellent job by Pittsburgh. So we keep that in mind. Houston's in some trouble. I know Blanco had a no-hitter yesterday into the 6th inning. That's the latest we've seen in a long time on the back-to-back situation a la Johnny Vandermeer. He gave up the ground single, but Houston has not played well right out of the gate. I mean, they did beat the Blue Jays, but they had a bad series in Texas. They got killed 2 games in a row. We know what the Yankees did to them. They're 3 3-7. You never, ever write the Astros off, but a little concerned by they haven't played very well. They're not whole. Major injuries with their rotation specifically, but 3-7. The division with Texas and Seattle is pretty respectable, so we keep an eye on the Astros here right out of the gate. So those are the four teams that I wanted to mention. Alana's going to get to the Red Sox here momentarily. And then this sad note today, Jerry Grody, an excellent defensive catcher for the Mets. He anchored that very, unbelievable pitching staff in the late for a year or two. Gary Gentry, Jerry Kuzman, a very useful offensive player, better hitter than you thought, 250, 255 in a day. If you caught behind the plate well and you hit a little bit, you were extra important. Jerry passed away today. Sounds like heart failure, or yesterday in Austin, Texas. He was, I believe, 81 years of age. Jerry was a hard-nosed catcher, and he was good because he could tell Seaver Kuzman what to do. He had Gil Hodges helping him, and he was the boss. And he was a tough Texan, and he knew how to play the game properly. Had a long career, Jerry Grody, the longtime Met who helped them, win 2 pennants and the World Championship. So that's where we are. We got a busy afternoon today, busy morning today. And Bob, in a minute, we look forward to that. We're going to do 2 segments with him. But Alana, most important here, too. And she joins us and says hello, Ms. Rizzo. It's all yours. Take it away.
Good morning. I hate to hear that about Jerry Grody. I hate to hear that, of course. Good baseball mind, and of course what you said, what he did with the Mets in the late 60s. Happy Hank Aaron Day. I'm wearing to honor him, 755. To me, he is the true home run king. Of course, today's celebration is when he hit 715 to break Babe Ruth's record. We're going to get into that with Bob Costas. And I love how he said, Chris, that he didn't want people to forget Babe Ruth. He wanted people to remember Henry Aaron. I love that quote from him after he broke the record. So obviously 755 in his Hall of Fame career. Looking forward to those segments with Mr. Costas. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about this situation between the Players Association and the league. What I find is they both agree that there is definitely an issue with starting pitcher and the increase of injuries for starting pitchers. But the problem is they continue to both point the finger outward versus inward. And I think you have to look at it from a player perspective too. The players were adamant that they did not want the pitch clock. I'm not saying the pitch clock is the only reason for the increase in injuries to starting staff. I think there's a combination of the pitch clock, not enough time to recover in between pitches, in between starts, in between outings, whatever you want to say. Obviously, the higher velocity, the intensity of the pitches that they're throwing, the fact that they want to prioritize strikeouts at any cost, this is an issue. And I don't know what the right answer is, but pointing fingers at one another is not necessarily the way to go for this. And we're talking about massive pitchers. We're talking about high-end starting pitchers, which is such a valuable commodity. Garrett Cole, the AL reigning Cy Young Award winner. Jacob deGrom is still on the shelf. Clayton Kershaw is more of a shoulder and back issue than ever an elbow issue, but Max Scherzer still hasn't pitched. Spencer Strider now, the opening day starter for the Atlanta Braves, the guy that's the king of the strikeout every single year, he's probably going to miss a huge bulk of the season because he just had that UCL issue with the MRI showed. He's probably going to have to head towards surgery. And of course, Justin Verlander. You could argue that most of these guys are on their way to the Hall of Fame, and they're all dealing with these injuries, and it stinks. It stinks for Atlanta. It stinks for the Mets. Of course, it stinks for the Astros and the Rangers and everybody that's being affected by this. But I think it's a couple of things. I think, like I said, I think it's the pitch clock, maximum effort, velocity, analytics-driven strategies. It's straining pitchers' bodies beyond what they can do, beyond what their body is naturally supposed to do. And I do agree with you that kids these days throwing 100 miles an hour, they don't even care where they locate it, but throwing as hard as they can, as much as they can, is a huge proponent of why this stuff is happening. But we need to figure this out before more high-end starting pitchers or anybody. I don't want to see anybody get hurt before this happens to more pitchers, because I know for a fact that the pitchers were adamant that they did not want a pitch clock. Is that the only thing that's causing this? Of course not. But there's a combination of things leading to these massive injuries.
Well, bottom line is, if they didn't want the pitch clock so much, they shouldn't have negotiated where the owners in the last scenario had control of the rules. If they were that worried about it, they should not have given up the rules interpretation to the commissioner's office, which they did in a lockout. They were more wrapped up in the money. So if they were that concerned about it, they had a chance to negotiate it.
I think it was a point of negotiation, yes, and it was the one thing, I guess, not the one thing, but a thing that they conceded on. I mean, we could still be in a work stoppage, honestly, as contentious as that whole situation was between the league and the Players Association. So something's got to give, because when you're starting to lose the likes of Spencer Strider and Garrett Cole and Verlander and Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw, all these Hall of Famers, something's got to give.
Well, remember, Scherzer and Verlander are 40 years old. I mean, to be fair. And DeGrom had a Tommy John long before there was a pitch clock. So he's had Tommy John already, and you can't blame him.
All right, what about?
So you got to be fair.
What about? No, all right. What about Walker Buehler? He's not 40.
All right, well, I understand. Walker Buehler, I mean, that was a scenario. Listen, they've been Tommy Johns forever. This is not, it's just, all the data indicates that it's not pitch clock. All the data, to be fair. All the data. You got to be fair.
I think it's partly, it's a huge combination of things. I'm not saying it's just the pitch clock.
Alana, it's not the pitch clock. It's 15-year-olds throwing 100 miles an hour.
What about the opportunity to not have the tacky or sticky stuff? Is it that?
He was at Syracuse at the time in 1974, about ready to get his first job. He's our pal, Bob Costas. Bob, let's go through memory lane first. We all watched it. Mm-hmm. I was old enough, thank God. Where were you when he hit it? I know you were working in Syracuse. You sent a little congratulatory telegram, you and your little buddies. Give him a little rundown there first. Go ahead. Let me hear.
Yeah, I was still a senior at Syracuse University, but I got a job at the NBC affiliate in Syracuse, and so I happened to be in the newsroom, and there were 9 or 10 of us there, and everything stopped. Not just the sports department, but the news department. Everything stopped. The game was on NBC nationally. Kurt Gowdy was doing it along with Tony Kubek. And then, to show you how long ago it was, half a century, we decided in the aftermath, since we were all so jacked up about it, that we would send Henry a congratulatory telegram. And I'm sure that with all the reactions, the first thing that happened the next day when he showed up at Fulton County Stadium was, hey, have I heard from little Bobby Costas yet? Has he checked in? I'm expecting a telegram from him. Check with the Western Union office.
Now, you know what the funny thing is, Bob, is that there was not as much attention in the last week or so of the 73 season when, he hit number 713 on the second to last day. And I think that added to a lot of the anticipation because you had 5 or 6 months of an off year to think about Henry only being 2 home runs away. Because I do remember late in the 73 season, there was a watch with Henry, nothing like, though, the beginning of 1974. How about that for a sec? Let me hear.
Yeah, he's at 713 the entire offseason. Then he homers on opening day at Riverfront Stadium against the Reds to make it 714. But there was a bit of controversy because the Braves understandably wanted him to break the record at home, and they had the 3 games in Cincinnati. And Commissioner Bowie Kuhn said, look, the integrity of baseball, he has to play at least 2 of those 3 games. He can't sit them out. So he homered on opening day. He played 1 of the next 2 games. And then the very first game back at Fulton County Stadium on Monday night, April 8th, 1974. It almost seems preordained because of all the buildup, but, he could have gone a week without hitting it, and as it happened, he hit it that night.
And I thought Kuhn made the right call in the opening week of the season against Cincinnati. He should have played 2 of the 3. I think that was a fair compromise. What I cannot defend is Kuhn not being at the game on the Monday night. Now, that is one of the worst decisions in the world that he doesn't go to Atlanta for the Monday night. Let's talk about those 2 things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I forget the particular situation, but I know the situation. I forget the particular organization that he was going to speak in front of. He had a commitment, a previous commitment that day, which he decided to honor. But nobody, whatever this was, the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club, whatever it was, they all would have understood. This is a momentous moment. And Kuhn didn't properly sense the moment, so that's a demerit during his commissionership.
You knew Henry well. We know, first off, all the terrible mail that he got. And Henry, used that, and, it's almost like he kept it in boxes in the attic. And you did a good job. You said, Henry, a lot of people wanted you to break a record just as much as more so than the few idiots out there who were going to give you a hard time about breaking Ruth's record. Let's discuss that for a sec. Let me hear. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was more than a few idiots. Racism still exists, but then a lot of it was more overt, and particularly in the South, not confined to the South, but particularly there. He received thousands of letters, many of them encouraging, but many of them threatening, many of them bigoted and filled with the N-word and all the rest, and death threats. It perhaps was not as bad as what Jackie Robinson had faced a quarter century earlier, but it was bad. To the point where he had to have FBI protection for his children, extra security, all the rest. And he told me and others that as he got into the high 600s, his determination to pass 714 was based less on a personal achievement and more on refuting the bigots. And there's no question that that bigotry existed, and he felt the full force of it. But in our many conversations over the years, I tried to gently make this point to him. Henry, I hope you understand that not just in retrospect, where you triumphed over all of it and most of the country came around, but even in the moment, it wasn't just black America who respected and appreciated you. Much of white America did. And many of us were smart enough to understand nothing eliminates Babe Ruth. These dopes who thought, oh, well, if someone hits more home runs than Babe Ruth, they'll forget about Babe Ruth. Here we are 50 years later. Has anybody forgotten about Babe Ruth? He's still a figure of legend. But Henry acknowledged that, yes, I understand that millions of white Americans respected and admired what I did. And I think it was important for him to understand that. And ultimately, the reason he did was that he was not just a great baseball player. He was such a decent human being. Everybody who knew him, everybody who crossed paths with him, said how humble he was, how much class and dignity he had, and how deeply decent he was. And that was my experience with him as well.
100% tremendous player, and it's amazing when you think about it, with the fan base, with all the fans running around the bases with him, which you know, in this day and age would scare the heck out of you. Then he'd kind of just no problem. Craig Sager at home plate with all the photography. I mean, some of the things that happened that night when he was circling the bases is really hard to imagine, and would never happen today. Especially, it's hard to imagine, Bob, by what you just said of the thousands of folks who didn't want him to do it. That would, you would think, scare people, and yet here are fans running around the bases with him, at least two of them, when he hit number 715. How about that? Let me hear.
Yeah, so the security wasn't exactly airtight, but luckily all those who ran on the field wanted to celebrate Henry Aaron rather than have some sort of malignant intentions. So there was that.
And of course, there it is with at home plate and how high side Henry was. The Braves won the game, by the way, 7-4. If you think about it, and you know, Downing's handled it very, very well. I've had him on many a time when Henry passed away. Downing was a very good pitcher. We all know that Tom House made the catch in the outfield, but Downing was a very, very good pitcher and very dignified. And he threw it in there, and Henry, you know, hit it out to left center. But how about Al Downing and the Dodgers in this situation? Let me hear your thoughts there. Go ahead.
Well, Downing had a good few seasons with the Yankees, and then later with the Dodgers, and then later became a broadcaster. I don't know him that well, but when I've crossed paths with him, as you say, a very nice and decent guy, and he understood that he had a place in history. It's a footnote, but he didn't want to do anything to take anything away from Henry Aaron. And after all, if it wasn't going to happen that day, it would have eventually happened. It wasn't like Roger Maris on the last day of the season off Tracy Stallard in 1961, now or never. It was going to happen, and it just so happened that Downing was the guy who served up the pitch.
Calls. Let's go from the top with Bob, who wrote that, did a tremendous job with it. You know he's going to voice it superbly. Gowdy was a tremendous announcer, Bob. You know, I know NBC had the Monday night package. I don't know if this was originally on the schedule, if they added it because of this. You can explain that. But, you know, the way Gowdy, he was, you know what I like about Gowdy? He was simple. He didn't make it about himself. He was simple. He was like your uncle calling a ball game. And I loved his call here first. Let me hear your thoughts. Go ahead. Shoot.
Well, Kurt was one of those guys who makes the Hall of Fame by being good for a very, very long time. He was not a spectacular announcer. He was a good, credible announcer that people felt comfortable with. And ultimately, that winds up being greatness. So that's kind of the path to greatness for Kurt Gowdy. Milo Hamilton obviously had a commanding voice, and his call of that moment is truly excellent. But then when you get to Scully, as so often happened, it's the highest level of the craft. Sometimes, like Koufax's perfect game in '65, Gibson's at-bat in '88, or this moment, sometimes with Scully, that craft crosses over into art.
Fair, but Bob, at the time, nobody heard Scully's call. It was a local call in L.A. They heard the call. They heard Gowdy's call. 37 million people watched this game. 14.9 households, 2.5 households, 37. Gowdy's call is the call that most reverberates for the average fan at the time. I think Scully's call, legacy-wise, is more significant. But Gowdy at the time was the call that all of America was listening to and watching. Is that fair to say?
It's absolutely fair. It's an objective fact. But subsequently, Milo Hamilton's call has been played far more often. And actually, in the last decade or so, I think people began to realize how significant and how lastingly perfect Vin Scully's call was. But Hamilton's call is excellent. It's Hall of Fame quality. Scully's call is Vin Scully. Something else that strikes you as you watch it, no matter how many times we've seen it, is just Aaron's dignity and class. He rounds the bases. The Dodger players want to shake hands with him, and they do. But he rounds the bases just as if it was home run number 315, not 715. But that was typical of him.
A lot of the great home run calls, you got the obviously the Hodges call with Bobby Thompson. I know that the Mazeroski call got screwed up with the Art Ditmore scenario instead of Ralph Terry. But a lot of McDonough's call with the home run by Carter. Would you put these three calls, based on the magnificence of the moment, as the three most signature home run calls in the history of baseball?
No. Hodges, McDonough's call even of Carter, Scully's call of Gibson. I'm not trying to diminish anybody, but it's Milo Hamilton and Vin Scully that are somewhere on the list. Kurt Gowdy, who I knew, who I respected, he's an all-time great announcer, not just in baseball, in football, college, and the NFL. He did the Final Four for a long time. He did the American Sportsman on ABC, even though he was working on NBC, and he's out fishing and hunting and all that stuff. Kurt Gowdy belongs in any Hall of Fame. But as I said before, rarely were his calls spectacular. It's just the cumulative excellence that gets him there. So it's Hamilton and Scully's call that actually resonate more than Gowdy's call in this instance, with full respect for Kurt.
Hamilton made a deal, right, with the Atlanta, because he did the games with Ernie Johnson. He made a deal that he was going to call every home run from 700 on, no matter what the circumstances were, because he wanted to be, and he was the voice of the Braves. So if it wasn't his inning, he was still going to actually call the Henry at bats. Do you have any issue with that historically or not?
No, I'm not aware of the circumstances. I wasn't even aware of those particulars until you just said it. When someone is the big-time voice of a team, now, as I said on the piece, Milo worked for a half dozen teams or more. But I can recall in 1974 and then again in '79 when Lou Brock was approaching what was then Maury Will's single-season record and then what was Ty Cobb's all-time record for stolen bases. No matter who was calling the game at the time in the Cardinal booth when he got on base, they handed the mic back to Jack Buck. Jack Buck was too classy to have insisted upon that, but Bob Starr, who was one of the announcers, and Mike Shannon, who was another at that time, they insisted upon it. They understood that for posterity, Cardinal fans would want Jack Buck's voice on those historic moments. So that's the way it played out. Something else that I want to mention here, while we still have time, and I hope we do. Billy Aaron, Hank's widow, was kind enough to ask me to be one of the eulogists at his funeral. President Bill Clinton was another. It was quite a group. And we only had a short period of time because there were so many eulogists. And I chose to concentrate on a story that Hank had told me and others. His father, whom he loved, grew up in the segregated Jim Crow South. And it really pained Henry Aaron to see his father have to step off the sidewalk if a white person came the other way, to have to go through those routine degradations and humiliations. And when he was a young kid, Hank said to his dad at one point, this is by Hank's account, I want to be an airline pilot. And his dad said, ain't no colored airline pilots. This is before the Tuskegee Airmen and other things. He also said, I want to be a baseball player. And his dad said, ain't no colored baseball players. I guess he wasn't thinking of the Negro Leagues. Sometime in the late 1940s, the Dodgers were barnstorming up, as teams used to do. Dodgers trained in Florida. They're barnstorming up to Brooklyn before the start of the season and stopping off in various places to play exhibition games. So they stop in Mobile, and young Henry Aaron, 13 years old, whatever he was, skips school to see Jackie Robinson address a small group of black citizens in Mobile, Alabama at a drugstore. He skips school to see this. Then he goes to the game and he doesn't have the money to pay for a ticket. And he climbs a tree behind the right field fence, which had a view of the field. And from there, he catches a glimpse of his baseball idol. I get choked up every time I talk about stuff like this. I get choked up by decency more than by sadness. He then goes on to become, arguably, in a social sense, the most significant baseball player since his idol, Jackie Robinson. The two guys behind me in Studio 24/7, Mays and Mantle, along with Aaron, they are, Mickey's prime was shorter. They're the three greatest players of their generation. Throw in Frank Robinson and Roberto Clemente just a tiny notch beneath. But Aaron's significance, you know, Willie Mays is the greatest all-around player. Mantle has a kind of place in history of his own. But Henry Aaron's place transcends baseball.
And he was underrated his whole career. You know, he broke in 54,
Yep.
so thank goodness he probably played. He played against many games against Jackie, who was still playing for Brooklyn there
Yes.
in 54, 55. So he went up against him, his hero. Great job, Bob. Always a pleasure. Well done on the piece. You know we love you. Thanks for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug.
Jared Carrabis is the newest member of the MLB Network family, going to be on Off Base, of course, and we're always happy to have him back. And if you know anything about Jared, you know that he is the biggest Boston Red Sox fan on the planet. And with good reason, has some optimism going into the 2024 season. Jared, welcome. Welcome to the team and welcome to High Heat. What has impressed you the most about, albeit a small sample size, of what the Red Sox have been able to do so far?
Has to be the pitching staff. I mean, we spent the entire offseason complaining we need to add a pitcher. You got to go get Jordan Montgomery. We had a pipe dream about Yamamoto. That obviously wasn't going to happen. So we kind of came into this season thinking, man, could this Red Sox team be better than what they thought they were going to be because of the pitching? And then you come in here, Andrew Bailey has performed miracles on this staff, Alana. We are looking at the best ERA in baseball by a wide margin. This is the team ERA right now is under 2. They're the only team in baseball that's under 2. They're almost a full run better than the next best team in baseball. So that's been a big surprise for us. And the rotation's getting all the love, but you look at the bullpen and you've got guys in the bullpen that have been doing as great of a job as the guys in the rotation have been doing.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the fact, too, that they had a very strong road trip. They haven't even played at Fenway yet. I know everyone's excited about that. So let's talk about the fact that they have a successful road trip, albeit maybe not against the best competition. Tell me about the strength of schedule. Is this legitimately a good Red Sox team, or do we need to see them in better competition like we will against the Orioles?
I think that it's both. You can look at the strength of schedule and say, you know what, they went against the Seattle Mariners, who didn't have the best offense last year, but I got the Mariners making the playoffs this year. So what they did against Seattle, I'm impressed by that. Oakland A's, sorry, Dallas, they're the Oakland A's. Then you look at the Angels, there's some guys that can thump in that lineup. And those were some good pitching performances that we saw against that Angels team. But to your point about, you know, do they have to play some better teams? We're going to see them play against the Baltimore Orioles. We'll get sort of a better gauge on where they're at. But for what we expected them to be, I have to sit here and say that, yes, I'm impressed, but I need to see more.
I was so bummed, Jared, when I saw Trevor Story go down diving for that ball. You knew immediately he dislocated his shoulder. And I've known Trevor for a long time, covered him when he was with the Colorado Rockies. And the Red Sox fans haven't yet seen what Trevor Story can mean to their team because he hasn't been able to stay healthy. How do they pivot from this loss?
You know, to the point about, you know, we can't fully appreciate it. You're totally right that we haven't had a full season of Trevor Story yet. but just seeing in the handful of games that he's played after, no offense to some of the guys that played shortstop last year, but that was a tough watch. The guys that they trotted out at shortstop in Trevor Story's absence last year really gave you this sense of appreciation for what Trevor Story can bring to the table defensively, just in the handful of games that he was able to play this year. But when you talk about the loss, I mean, I don't think it can be understated just how much of a loss this is for a team that you've got ground ball pitchers in this rotation. Like, you're going to depend on your defense up the middle. You have Rafaela playing in center field. That might be an option where they bring him to shortstop at some point. You called up David Hamilton yesterday. The ball found him quite a bit in his time there yesterday. In just the one game, he homered. So you get the offense, which is great. But the defense is what's important. So far, so good. But they might have to look at some other options there and maybe moving Rafaela to shortstop, maybe putting Jarren Duran back in center field.
Yeah, you mentioned Jared Duran. He's off to a hot start, hitting .349 in his first 10 games. Duran's 15 hits are tied with Altuve and Steven Kwan for the lead there as far as that is concerned. How have you seen his game develop and improve?
Yeah, so when we saw him down in the minor leagues, he had a lot of pop, and he still does. I don't know if you've seen this guy, but his biceps are the size of my torso. He loves working out. He's a huge meathead. I love Jarren Duran. But to talk about his game evolving, I think he's kind of just gotten to the point of bat to ball. I think when you're built like him and you look at yourself in the mirror, you probably think, I'm going to go out there and hit 40 home runs. Like, why shouldn't I? I'm a very strong guy. But he's also one of the fastest guys in the league. So all he has to do is get on base. He's also up there in stolen. You think he's got like 6 stolen bases already. So he's been hit by pitches. He's walked. He's gotten singles. All he has to do is get on base, and it's a double, or it's a triple, because he can swipe a bag like no one else in the league right now. So I think he's kind of learning more about himself, where I can just get on. I don't have to, hit the ball out of the ballpark. If I just find some grass, it's extra bases.
This team is talented, and I think they're a lot more talented than most of us gave them credit for. Perhaps not you, because I know you follow them incredibly closely. But I want to ask you, before I let you go, Jared, quickly, the impact that Larry Lucchino had, the obvious impact that he had on the city of Boston and the Red Sox, obviously recently passing away.
It goes beyond just the Red Sox, too. I mean, when you ask baseball fans, hey, can you list your favorite ballparks? Fenway is in the top 5. Petco is in the top 5. Camden Yards will be in the top 5. Larry Lucchino's fingerprints were all over that. I mean, he loved the game of baseball. He did so much for the community here in Boston. And the Red Sox don't win those World Series without him. He had that attitude, that go for it, that failure is not an option attitude that the Red Sox needed at the time that they needed it. So his influence will forever be felt here in Boston.
No question. He made you work harder. He made you work smarter. And the Boston Red Sox are a 3-time World Series champion under his tutelage. Jared Carrabis does a great job, of course, on the Baseball is Dead podcast and Section 10 podcast as well. And now he is a member of the MLB Network family. We appreciate your time, Jared. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Alana.
There is a speed bump on the front.